Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello students, welcome back to the lecture Women's Writing, and as you know that this is not a discipline, it is a kind of study which we are trying to bring forward into the discourse so that more and more women around the world may take advantage, draw inspiration from this body of work. So moving on to our first topic in this lecture series, language and patriarchy. We will try to understand what is the relationship between language and the so-called patriarchy that you have studied so far. Written language is a permanent record. Whenever there is the concept that something is written down, you will have to understand it is different from speaking it. So at this point, this particular word is very important when it comes to language, because when you write something down, it becomes a permanent record, as you have seen in this particular point. What is the importance of a permanent record? It can be a legal document, it can be a chronicle, it can be even a historical document which will carry the essence of that particular era. So written language is more powerful, more permanent than the spoken one. And if this written language tends to become a part of patriarchy, if it tends to become an agency of patriarchy, there is something amiss. Because again, when we talk about equality, there will never rise any kind of power equations or power hierarchy or what we call as hegemony, which we will study in later chapters. The next point here is grammar of representation. So when there is a language, there ought to be a grammar of that language. When you come to the grammar of English language, you have something called the subject and the object. And most of the times we are asked to change from active to passive and passive to active. And that time you change the positions of the subject and the object. Here, you will see that the object over here is women and subject is men mostly. This is the social reality. This is the social equation. I would say that this is the grammar of patriarchy, where men are always the subject, they deliver the work, and women are always back at the receiving end. That is how we can relate that this is the language of patriarchy. Next, I would like to quote linguist Robin Lakoff. She wrote a book, Language and Women's Place. It was published in 1973. In this book, she gives us some wonderful insights. It is actually a research, a study. These insights are mainly men, when they speak, they give references to quality, they use judgmental adjectives, and when women use language, they use intensive adverbs, empty adjectives, and most importantly, what she observes is women lack sense of humor. And how is that proven? It is proven by the inability to tell a joke. More reference to emotions. So these are some things which we already know, that this is the reality. When you go around, you walk around in the streets, you catch any random person and ask what are the personalities of men and women, you will come to know that they also have this similar kind of opinion, that women are more prone to emotions, men are more prone to logic. So this kind of things have already been studied, and Lakoff, she is a linguist, she already talks about it in her book Language and Women's Place. Next, we also have to consider this. There are many words which are a part of the language, has been very normal at one particular time, but now has changed completely. What are those words? Let us have a look. Master and mistress. So master, it still has its own meaning, the original meaning, but mistress has a negative connotation, a negative sense of the meaning. It is sometimes akin to prostitution, which is again dehumanizing of the female entity. Wizard and witch. Wizard is again a masculine term, and it refers to a man in the society who practices magic. But for a witch, we always consider her something which is out of the society. Even in the novels, in media, in cinema, wherever you see, witches are portrayed as a kind of old, haggardly looking women with nostrils as big as anything, and when you see those kind of figures, you consider your brain gives a negative kind of image. And of course they are always chased out of the town, and sometimes they are also burned to death. That is what we have learned from history, which was in the Renaissance period, and before that there was practice of witch hunting. So that also gives us a sense how language has changed, where wizard is a good term, witch becomes a bad term. Dog and bitch. When you say these two words out loud in public, dog receives a positive connotation, but when you say bitch, the female dog, it receives a negative connotation because women are ashamed with the use of this particular word called bitch. So language changes over time. The meanings of the word change over time, and this is a perfect example of it. Nowadays in the social media reality, you will find absolutely many number of memes, posts and related content in Instagram, in Facebook, wherever you go, you will find this word, and it will mean a woman who is bad. Fox and vixen. Now when you say fox, it is of course a natural a creature, it is a part of the nature, and it is just an innocent creature. The portrayal of fox, although they are portrayed very clever, but when you say vixen, it is often used as a slang towards women, as an abuse, as a verbal abuse towards women who are cunning, who are shrewd, at least what the men or the patriarchal language is trying to explain. Sir and madam. Sir is still a very respectable term, but when it comes to madam, you will find examples throughout literature, especially in the European countries, where madam refers to the brothel keeper and a person who encourages prostitution. So this term is again imbued with a kind of negative sense. So our next slide, which is again a part of this same discussion, discusses another author, or rather a duo, Mulek and Braddock. They came up with another study, male and female language, differences in attributional consequence in a public speaking situation toward an explanation of the gender-linked language effect. This is a research paper and it was published in 1986. Now let us see what are the contents of this research. Whatever you understand, whatever lack of studied till now, that men are using adjectives which are highly judgmental and women are using words which are related to emotions, they are not markers. Cannot say that this is good and this is bad. They are a sort of gender-linked tendencies. So this is very natural. This is like a tendency. Women are more prone to emotions. If that is a reality, then let it be. The acceptance is very necessary, and you cannot, for example, undermine a particular gender based on that. See, undermining linguistic features associated with a particular gender. This is the argument that Mulek and Braddock gave, that if a woman is expressing her emotions, and that is not something bad, that is not something wrong, that is not something which is dehumanized, that is not something which is a part of patriarchal language. So next we move on to the underlining linguistic features associated with a particular gender. The undermining of linguistic feature is a concept that if women are using more emotive words, then it is bad. It is against reason. It is not intellectual. These kind of associations should be completely cancelled out. We cannot harbor this kind of bias when we are coming to study, when we are coming to research, when we are coming to academia, and when we are thinking about the human race as a whole. Women higher on socio-intellectual status and aesthetic quality. This is something again they speak of, Mulak and Braddock, and they consider it a kind of natural tendency, and this has nothing to do with the hegemonical relationship, the power equations that no, women are emotive so they are less, men are intellectual so they are more. No, it is just as natural as anything. And of course, men, their personality is full of dynamism and more. The next one is a very interesting issue, and we will talk about this after taking an example. You can go anywhere in the world and ask for the verbal abuses of the language. Any language you take up, the verbal abuses mostly revolve around the women and her body parts. Why is this? This is a natural tendency of all the languages of the world. Whenever it comes to shaming anybody, whenever it comes to dishonoring somebody, the language speakers, the inventors of the language, the people who make the language evolve more and more, we come to this point and we suffer because we are also somehow responsible for the evolution of this kind of practice in the society. That is, the verbal abuses that we are using every day in everyday life are all related to women and especially to her genitalia. And this is something which needs to be taken care of if we want to overcome the patriarchy which is prevalent in language. Here are some key terms which will take us forward throughout the lecture and of course the upcoming lectures, because if we do not understand these, it will be very difficult for us to understand further issues that has been discussed in the prescribed text. The first is dominance. What is dominance? Let us take the simple dictionary definition and consider controlling, prevailing, powerful position, especially in a social hierarchy. So hierarchy means somebody is at a top position, then somebody is at a second level, a third level, a fourth level and a fifth one. So when there is a hierarchy, there will always be prevalence of one particular group. They will try to force their opinions on the other groups which are under them. So in this case, dominance is a kind of theme when it comes to women's writing, where women are either falling prey to dominance or they are trying to resist it. For example, if you take the texts, The Yellow Wallpaper by Gilman or Mahashweta Devi's Draupadi, you will find that in both the cases, the equation of dominance varies. In one case, the woman feels victimized, and in the other case, the woman feels empowered. She is not letting the patriarchy to dominate her. Gilman's case, that is The Yellow Wallpaper, the unnamed narrator, she is thinking that she is becoming better. She has this misconception that her husband loves her very much and wants to get her fit as soon as possible. But this is not the case. What really happens is the husband is trying to control her, dominate her, lock her up in a room and cut away all her associations with work and writing. That way, she is becoming a victim to the patriarchal dominance. And in Mahashweta Devi's Draupadi, which we will again study in different situations, you will find that Draupadi is not inhibited by the dominance of the patriarchy. She is more empowered and she talks about overthrowing patriarchy. She not only talks about it, she shows it with her body, her naked body when she goes, her naked body when she encounters Senanayak, the one who ordered the harassment and the sexual assault on Draupadi. Moving on to the next point, discourse. What is a discourse? The term discourse refers to formal and orderly and usually extended expression of a thought on a subject. So, whenever you are trying to narrate a situation, you have to bring it into discourse. Maybe it's a subject, maybe it is something which is related to a particular field. Every time you try to narrate it, you will have to organize the content. And when you are organizing the content, you will be referring to other works which are very similar to it or share the common field. This kind of discussion is called a discourse. Next is narrative. Narrative can be anything. It can be a story, it can be a way of narration, it can be a novel, but let us go by the dictionary terms, which is a way of presenting or understanding a situation or series of events that reflects and promotes a particular point of view or set of values. So here we will understand what do we mean by reflects and promotes a particular point of view. Whenever you are telling a story, there will be a theme. Whenever you are writing a novel, there will be many themes. There will be plots and subplots, and everything will give you a holistic impact. That kind of impact, when you have it, you understand what are these stories and what kind of emotions they evoke in your mind. This is the entire reality of that particular literary text, is a narrative. Here, we will talk about another very important point which will come into effect time and again, that is power, possession of control, authority or influence over others. Whenever you try to influence another person, whenever you try to dominate another person, whenever you try to control another person, you will need power. And let me tell you something, language is power. Because whenever, I will give you the very simple example of a computer language. When you use a computer language, for example C, C++, Python, Java, Perl, all of these computer languages, they are used to program the computer in such a way that it will perform your work, your duties. Whatever your responsibilities are, you are transforming them into kind of a software program and you are setting it up in a computer system and it is doing what you are wanting it to do. Similarly with human languages, whenever language is being used by a human, it is actually your intention to control the other person, to influence the other person, to gather information, to ask for information or to give information to the other person and thereby changing their course of actions. Okay, now moving on to the next point, male gaze. Now, whenever I am looking at you over there, I am giving a kind of gaze, I am displaying a kind of gaze. My point of view, right here, I am standing and you there, sitting over there, you are under my gaze. So, what is the male gaze? Depicting women from a masculine perspective. Now, what is the masculine perspective? What is this male gaze? That of the man behind the camera. So, whenever there is a person who is recording a particular media, a movie, a video, is trying to create a video content, there is always a man behind the camera, and that person's gaze is one of the most important factors when it comes to male gaze, because this theory developed right after the film theories developed. When you study, maybe you will study the film theories, you will understand the relationship with this. And after the film theories, this male gaze was introduced into literary theories as well. Next is that of the male characters within the film cinematic representation. So when you're watching a Bollywood movie or a Hollywood movie, you see the camera focuses on the looks of the male characters and you see exactly how they are looking at the female characters, whether they are looking at the female characters with respect or whether they are looking at the female characters with lust in their eyes, or maybe they are looking at the female characters with anger. So however the male characters look at the female characters, that emotion is transferred to the audience, and that is part of the male gaze. That of the spectator gazing at the image. Now comes your position as the viewers. You are viewing this online content right now and you are a part of that same gaze. You are not only the person behind the camera, you are not only the male characters in this entire set. The set, the studio, the people around and the camera and the audience, you are a part of everybody. And whenever you find a character who is female and that character is being looked upon by a man, that constitutes the gaze. This same thing happens in literature as well. So whenever there is a character like Senanayak in Draupadi, that person looks at Draupadi and that person thinks that she's a convict, she's a tribal woman, she has no power, but Draupadi stands right up against it. She shows that I will not be subservient to male gaze. You cannot look at my naked body with lust because it has been assaulted, it is bleeding, it is full of wounds. You have to be afraid of that body. So when you are subverting the male gaze, you are creating a kind of resistance to patriarchy. Next, I would talk about psychoanalysis. Now, this study originated mostly with a psychoanalyst named Sigmund Freud. He was Austrian and he, for the first time, considered that women who were historical should not be given electric shocks. That was the popular therapy at that time. So, before moving on, we will just see that psyche in Greek, it means mind or soul or spirit. And the word analysis means to study something. Suppose this is an entire concept. So, you break it up into small parts and you take the part, this is part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5, and you take each part and you study it separately. You give it extra time, you give it a lot of energy. All the parts you are giving some special energy, you are considering other forms of literature, you are considering some research ideas, you are talking to people about these parts separately, and then you are putting all these parts together into another complete whole. This is the process of analysis. So, psychoanalysis means when you have a mind, you are breaking it up into parts and then you are studying each part with equal amount of respect, with equal amount of devotion, and then you are putting all the parts together again, and that time you arise more informed about the particular mind you are studying. So, a method of analyzing psychic phenomena and treating emotional disorders that involves treatment sessions during which the patient is encouraged to talk freely about personal experiences and especially about early childhood and dreams. So these are the parts in which we break up the mind into. So the mind does not gain its full consciousness all at once. It forms right from the childhood, and we will try to understand these in the upcoming slides. See, Sigmund Freud, he was the father of psychoanalysis, so they say, but here I will stop because we might not be very comfortable in using this kind of phrase, because when there is father of something, we must also consider who is the mother, because that is again an example of patriarchal language. You will have to, even all of us have to overcome this kind of instincts. So let us consider that Sigmund Freud is the originator. With him, this concept originated. So he created this concept. But this is again a study of the mind. That is, the mind has three separate sections: the id or the instinct section, ego or the reality section, and superego, that is the morality section. Now, right from the childhood, id starts developing, because at the childhood level, you don't have that kind of training. You don't have moralities by birth. You gain moralities through your experiences. And ego is the reality around you. It is also not there right from the childhood, because when you develop a kind of sense of yourself, only then your ego develops. Whenever you commit a mistake, your parents come and they tell you, your guardians come and they tell you that this is wrong and this is right. A child does not have the sense of right and wrong, but the child only is full of id. It has the instincts in it, the hunger instinct, the instinct to go and relieve itself, ego. This portion is something the child develops along as it grows up. So whenever a child interacts with the reality around it, it interacts with its parents, it interacts with its friends, and it interacts with all of the relatives, they find a kind of outside the self experience. And this is something which we understand gradually. Superego, the morality which everybody tells us, this is where we say right or wrong. Let us move on to the next psychoanalyst, Jacques Lacan. Lacan discusses Freud's concept and takes it further. It studies the child and comes up with the mirror stage, where a small child for the first time looks at a mirror. When the child looks at a mirror, it is for the first time it realizes that the child itself is a different entity from that of the mother. The mother has a separate head, the mother has separate eyes, the mother can put it down and it will be a separate body. And this is where the child develops the sense of the self. So, this mirror stage is very important as far as psychoanalysis goes. Julia Kristeva, she talked about the same mirror stage that Jacques Lacan has already proposed, but she extends it to language. She says that the I and the other is the way in which we make the power relations in the language. I am the subject. I am in power. You are outside my body. You are outside. You are an outside entity. So you are not in power. Next, Judith Butler. Besides being an advocate for gender rights, Judith Butler is also a very well-known psychoanalyst and a philosopher. She talks about desire for the first time. Before that, nobody has considered desire being a particular area of expertise, a particular area of study. She talks about the self and what does it want, what kind of association does it want. And she talks about the body also, what kind of gender relations the body is trying to form. All of these comes under this act of desire, and she writes all of this in a book called Gender Trouble. It is a very good book. If you are interested in gender studies, you must read this book. And suppression of homosexual tendencies, the same thing she has considered. When you read the book, you will find that she talks about the extended version of Oedipus complex. She says that Oedipus complex, which is something which Sigmund Freud has already proposed way back, this thing she extends and says that it is not only the Oedipus complex. A male child is attracted towards his mother is not the end of it. The male child is also attracted to his father, and the female child is also attracted to her mother. But all of these are suppressed by the society. All of these become a part of the society. The final one is Kate Millett. She talks about sexuality and mental health. Her dissertation, which is named as Sexual Politics, was a kind of revolt against this entire culture, because we know these names: D.H. Lawrence, Henry Miller, Norman Mailer. They were very famous novelists, playwrights, authors, and nobody dare stand up to them and say that they used a kind of patriarchal language which objectified women and which created a kind of space for women where only dehumanized lots are kept. So the female characters in these authors' novels were always victimized, or either assaulted, or either sexually assaulted, mentally assaulted. Every time they are at the end of the action. They are the ones who receive the action. They are never the subject, they are always the object. That is what her argument was in her thesis, and it's a historical fact that Kate Millett was not allowed to submit her dissertation. She only submitted it after a lot of quarrel with the authorities. So moving on to the next slide, psychoanalysis in women's writing. Till now we have studied what are the things that we have considered. Moving on to the following key terms, we have psychoanalysis in women's writing. Here one of the key phrases, I'd rather say, is the stream of consciousness. The stream of consciousness is a kind of way of narration which Virginia Woolf used in her writings. And this is a part of this psychoanalysis study because it shows how the narrators, especially the female characters in her novels, think and react to their surroundings, learn from their environment and contribute to the reality around them. She has written a book called A Room of One's Own, which was published in 1929, and in that there is a small part called Shakespeare's Sister. If Shakespeare had a sister, what would have happened to her? Will she have been educated enough to write the plays that Shakespeare had written? Would she have been given an opportunity to choose a career like Shakespeare had? So those are certain aspects which this particular essay suggests, and I very strongly encourage you to go and have a read. The second one is Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper. I have already mentioned this before, I am mentioning it again. This novel is about an unreliable woman narrator who is slightly hysterical. She suffers from anxiety disorders, and her husband, who is a doctor, is mistreating her rather than treating her. Where he must have taken care of her, he confines her and locks her up in a room. That creates more problems. Finally, we find the woman making strange movements, moving around in the room in all fours, crawling, creeping, and sometimes brushing against the wallpapers of the room which are yellow in color. She starts seeing somebody in those wallpapers, and she also imagines that the wallpapers mutate in the night. So all of these reflects the state of mind this particular unnamed narrator or the woman character in this particular short story, The Yellow Wallpaper. Moving on to the next one, Alice Walker's The Color Purple. I have already mentioned this in our previous lecture. The Color Purple is a novel which shows the way of life or the way a female Afro-American is leading, the way of life a female Afro-American is leading in a particular area. And most importantly, the male characters, the Afro-American male characters, they are undermining her even within her community. What kind of mistreatment she gets and what is her reaction to it, what is she thinking and how is she suppressing her emotions, Her entire life is full of suppressions, oppressions. Not only the people, the male characters in the novel oppress her, she oppresses herself. She takes all the burden of bearing children. She takes all the bad kind of emotions of being mistreated time and again, forced into a marriage she does not like, forced into a relationship she does not enjoy. All of these things she takes on along with a happy face. And she also, at certain point in the novel, advises for the same. When she sees some other female characters enjoying a kind of freedom, she says, again, she speaks against it. So that is something very interesting to note in Color Purple. Lastly, I have talked time and again about this Mahashweta Devi's Draupadi. It is one of those texts which defy the language of patriarchy and shows the mind of a female character in action, a mind which is empowered, which is not dominated, a mind of a tribal woman who has been treated in the society with all due respect, very akin to the male characters in her society. So this kind of gender equality in the tribal society, I will name the society here the Santals of West Bengal. This is the community Draupadi belongs to, and here men and women are given equal opportunities. They are trained in agriculture as well as weapons, and this kind of gender equality empowers this young girl. She becomes a rebel and she revolts against the male oppression as well as the system of the government that were exploiting the poor farmers and were siding with the zamindars. So we will talk more about it in details in other chapters. Next we move on to a very important part of this lecture, that is the dialectics. So I will clearly read it out. In philosophy, the Hegelian process of change in which a concept or its realization passes over into and is preserved and fulfilled by its opposite also. The critical investigation of this process is called dialectics. So there are two sides. And they preserve each other. They are interacting with each other, and the side A is preserving side B by argument and side B is preserving side A by argument. If one of the sides stop interacting with the other side, then that other side will become null and void, and this side will also lose its individuality and existence. So dialectics, this concept was given by Hegel. He is a German philosopher and he came up with this concept of dialectics. And this paved the path for the famous concept in Marxism. Development through the stages of thesis, antithesis and synthesis in accordance with the laws of dialectical materialism. So this dialectical word is this dialectics which Hegel has already given. Now when you talk about dialectical materialism, this A and this B becomes two separate class. This is class A and this is class B. And how this happens we will see in the upcoming slides. Again there is another discussion, the political, economic and social principles. Now the previous one was the philosophical kind of discourse. Now this one will be the economic kind of discourse. The political, economic and social principles and policies advocated by Karl Marx, especially a theory and practice of socialism including the labor theory of value, number 1, dialectical materialism, number 2, the class struggle and dictatorship of the proletariat until the establishment of classless society. So the entire argument of Karl Marx revolves around this argument that there must be a classless society. Now let us have a look how these classes evolved to begin with. In the year 1733, maybe there are 5 years plus and minus, there came a tendency of recruiting labor into the industries, because that was the year when industrial revolution started, especially in Britain. When this is the year where many machines were bought by the rich people and they were put to work, and many people from the villages, they were hired because the people from the villages, they did not have they did not have the concept of money, they were very cheap labor, so they were hired and they were formed into this organized labor. Karl Marx, this person, wrote 2 books right in 1818. Karl Marx, who was living from 1800s, the full name of Karl Marx is Karl Heinrich Marx, and from 1818 to 1883 he lived a very difficult life because he came up with the theory, this economic theory of exploitation, how the capitalist class is exploiting the labor class. He was hunted by the police, he was banished from his own country, and he spent most of his time hiding. But he came up with 2 wonderful books, The Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital. Both books were actually economic theories, and they had nothing to do with politics. Only people who were in power at that time, only people who wanted to have power at that time used these economic theories against the people, these organized labor sections, and they came up with revolution. They overthrew the power of the capitalists, and therefore they considered they have won, and this is how Marxism became a political debate, a political topic. We will also study that this particular concept was based on how bourgeois and proletariat, these are the 2 classes. Let me go back for a second to the previous slide. When we talk about these 2 classes, these are those 2 classes, the bourgeois and the proletariat. We will try to understand what these 2 classes mean. In order to understand those 2 classes, we'll have to understand what happens when machines work instead of people. The production cost of a particular material is 100 rupees, which includes raw materials, labor, packaging, machine energy supply, transport, store commission. All of these add up to 100 rupees. But when they are sold in the stores, they are sold at 500 rupees, and that is why this thing is printed on the cover of a material, that is MRP. This is the maximum price you can claim or anybody can claim for that product. So a thing that is actually manufacturing cost is 100 rupees is being sold at 500 rupees. So the net profit here is 400 rupees. Where does this 400 rupees go? It is not going to the labor. No. It is not going to the other sections as well. No, never. So where is this going? This is creating the capital. So those who are initially investing, those are the investors who created the products, they are keeping this entire 400 rupees for themselves. Again, since they have already have 100 rupees, they are investing. Now they will be investing out of 400 rupees, they will be investing 100 rupees, so they will have 300 rupees in their bank account. This thing they are not using, and this will generate this over the years when this entire system of production goes on in a loop. So every year they are getting 300 rupees, but we also know that there is something called inflation. So maybe the cost will rise up to 150 rupees and this cost will rise up to 600 rupees. So every time they will have 300 rupees and more along with them, they will become richer by day. But the labor charge will increase maybe by 25 or 30 rupees alongside the inflation. So here we understand that there are 2 classes which are strictly being formed. One is the rich class and one is the poor class. And this rich and this poor class, this rich class is called the bourgeois. This is how this word is pronounced, bourgeois. And this poor class is called the proletariat. These 2 classes, when they are being created, these 2 classes then again become, one is the bourgeois over here and the proletariat, and they interact with each other. One becomes the thesis, the other becomes the antithesis, and when this thesis and this antithesis, they are colliding against each other, they are interacting with each other, we have something called the synthesis. And this synthesis in our case is the middle class. This is how the middle class has risen to power. Then again we have another topic over here, that is alienation, the birth of capitalism. So when you see that you have something called when you see that you have something around here which is not being shared to any of these agencies, this is where the profit has been generated and none of these agencies so far has received a single share of this profit. So that is what we understand as alienation. We have also talked about alienation in our previous lecture, so we will only discuss it according to the material right now. So whenever you are deprived of your rights, whenever you are deprived of whatever you deserve, you are being alienated. So what do we do with this kind of idea? The dialectical materialism. Materialism, why? Because we are talking about production. We are talking about materials, raw materials which are being turned into marketable materials. And we have clearly two sides. One is investing and another is working. So dialectical materialism. And we again have two sides, the class A and the class B. The class bourgeois, who are the rich people, and class B, the proletariat, who are the labor class people. So what do we do with these kind of theories in women's writing? Well, we will go back to our previous idea of dominance and of power and of hierarchy. Whenever we come across these words, we will understand that there are clearly two places, two slides, two situations, one which has more power and one which has less power, one which has more higher standing in the society and one which has lower standing in the society, one which is dominating and the other which is dominated, one which is the subject and other which is the object. So the one is the male and the other is the female. One is the man and the other is the woman. So all the places you will find that this kind of disparity, unequalness persists. And when it comes to Marxism, it is equally applicable to women's writing, because women are writing about their women are writing about being dominated. They are writing about alienation. They are generating some kind of labor, but they are not being paid for it. Women in our society are considered as household slaves. We are working day and night and we are not getting paid for it. We are working for our children. We are raising them up. We are taking care of the old in the house, but we don't have any kind of monetary gain from that. So this story, Draupadi, shows that kind of effect. There was something called the Naxalite movement in West Bengal. Let me tell you briefly the history. In 1967, there was a kind of Marxism prevalent in West Bengal, and they tried to uplift the uneducated and tribal people, the farmers who were working in the fields under the zamindars. They wanted them to be freed. They wanted them to have their own lands. So there was a call for the redistribution of land to the landless, and these tribal people, they did not own any kind of land. They did not have even the right to drink from the wells, because the wells belonged to the upper class, to the zamindars. So there was a class oppression. These workers, those who worked every day and night in the fields to grow the crops, they were not allowed to get a share from the crops. So the Marxists came to help these people, and they urged them to rise up in revolution, rise up against this kind of exploitation, rise up against this kind of alienation. And of course, after the class oppression, there is always the resistance to patriarchy and its language of assault. So when you read the story, you will see that Draupadi and Dulna, they are two tribals who are trying to get back to their land, and they do not want to serve. They do not want to serve without any kind of payment. And as the story proceeds, you will come to know that Dulna's grandfather took some grains from the zamindar, and in return the zamindar said that you will have to work in our fields free of cost. All you will get is food and clothing. So that kind of oppression was prevalent in that area. Resistance to patriarchy and its language of assault. As the story proceeds, you will come to know that Draupadi and Dulna, they have risen up in revolt, they have captured the Zamindar and they have killed him. And in support of the Zamindar, the police had come and cordoned off the entire village and have machine gunned everybody. Draupadi and Dulna survives. And when they go into hiding, the police hunt them. They make use of every means possible to hunt those two down. Initially they are able to kill Dulna, and later on they capture Draupadi. But Draupadi does not yield to torture. She takes torture up front. She looks torture in the eye and resists it. She says that you cannot dishonor me because you are not men. You are not respectable people. And moreover, unlike Draupadi in Mahabharata, she does not beg for cloth. Whenever somebody tries to garb her, whenever somebody tries to hide her scars and wounds, she tears off all of her clothes and she says that no, I do not want your clothes, because I will wear clothes, I will feel ashamed only when there are respectable people in front of me, when there are real men in front of me. You are not men, you are simply animals. So she is resisting that kind of patriarchal dominance. Now we are going to look at we are going to take an example from the texts of what the language of resistance really mean. First we are going to read. Shaming her, a tear trickles out of the corner of her eye. In the muddy moonlight, she lowers her lightless eye, sees her breasts, and understands that indeed she is made upright. Her breasts are bitten raw, the nipples torn. How many? 4, 5, 6, 7. Then Draupadi had passed out. Just notice the sentence construction. Shaming her, a tear trickles out of the corner of her eye. Is there any adjective that is being used? For example, eye, or what kind of tear it is, what kind of eye it is a bloody eye, it is a red eye, it is a tired eye, nothing like that. In the muddy moonlight, now the moonlight has been described as muddy. She lowers her lightless eye. Now in this part of this text, we have something called lightless eye. It is not a very emotional term. It is a term which takes away all the emotion, as if something has been sapped away from that word, takes away the emotion, takes away the wholesomeness of the word. Lightless eye, sees her breasts and understands that indeed she is made upright. This sentence, it starts with this kind of a adjective, but there are no more adjectives in this sentence. Next, her breasts are bitten raw. Here is another adjective, the nipples torn, another adjective. None of these adjectives at all tell us about how Draupadi is feeling at that moment. She is just making matter of fact statements. Matter of fact statements. These are not emotional outbursts. These are rather very calculated statements. How many? 4, 5, 6? Then Draupadi had passed out. There is no iota, there is never any example where the scene is exaggerated or is explained or described as if to evoke a kind of pathos or let us say sympathy, pity. It does not look like or read like a tragedy. There are no qualities. It does not look like a tragedy. There are no qualities of a tragedy. Tragedy does not apply to these sentences. It is only a matter of fact statements. The moon vomits a bit of light and goes to sleep. Only the dark remains, a compelled spread eagled still body. Active pistons of flesh rise and fall over it. This is the scene where Draupadi is violated. Even then, it is not turned into a scene where you will feel disgust. It is again written in very matter of fact statements.
The only thing that is literary in this particular statement is the moon vomits a bit of light. Generally, in the patriarchal language, when you think of language as the language of patriarchy, the moon is always considered beautiful. Women's beauty are mostly compared to that of the moon. Here, in this particular sentence, the moon is not beautiful. The same language which praises the moon, here the moon is shown as a drunk person who vomits a bit of light and goes to sleep. Draupadi stands up, she pours the water down on the ground, tears her piece of cloth with her teeth. Here, we cannot imagine the pain she is going through. Why we cannot imagine? Because the author has not written about the pain anywhere. Author has not written about the pain. None of the words describe the amount of pain Draupadi is going through. All the descriptions are specifically made about the actions they are doing. She is pouring the water, although she is thirsty, she is very thirsty at this point of time. She pours the water down on the ground. Somebody has given her water, she pours it down. Tears her piece of cloth. She is standing over there naked. Somebody has given her a piece of cloth and she tears it away with her teeth. Draupadi comes closer, stands with her hand on her hip, laughs and says, "The object of your search, Draupadi mentioned. You asked them to make me up. Don't you want to see how they made me up?" Do you think that this particular sentence, this particular utterance of Draupadi is sarcastic? And it is not sarcastic which is more important, it is the condition in which Draupadi is actually using sarcasm. She is half dead, her body is bleeding, she is in excruciating pain, although none of these writings till here, none of those explain the kind of pain Draupadi is in. None of them none of the sentences use any words which shows the pain she is in. Only the moon has been compared to a drunk youth. Apart from that, there is no such expression save for the lightless eye, moon vomits, she's nipples, the nipples torn, breasts are bitten raw. These expressions are the only expression which shows that she is in a bad shape. None of them show that she is afraid. None of them show that she needs help. No words of any kind of help, no words of pity is reflected in this paragraph. Had it been a common patriarchal language, everywhere the description would be very gory, that means bloody, or very terror striking, everybody will be terrified at the condition of Draupadi. But in these last statements, people, the audience, the viewer, they are not terrified. They are rather strengthened by Draupadi's utterances. They feel the strength in her life, in her body, they feel that kind of strength. So, this language is not a language of the victim, it is the language of a person who is empowered. So, that is how the language is creating a kind of separate resistance group. It is creating a resistance to the language of patriarchy. This is the way Mahashweta Devi uses her language to not victimize women. And Santhal women as opposed to the ideal women. Like we discussed in our previous lecture, we are not the angel of the house. We are not the ideal kind of women who will cook and clean, produce babies and do whatever our husbands ask us to do. We, the encouraged lot, we, the encouraged, the empowered women, we will strive against this kind of oppression. And that is what Santhal women, the Santhal community shows us. They have this kind of gender equality. And lastly, alienation, we have talked about it again and again. Whenever a person is denied his or her right to life, denied his or her right to have the body,
denied right to have the honor, you will always be alienated. You will be segregated, you will be separated from your rights, separated from everything you deserve. Let's consider all of these literary theories that we have discussed so far very important for our next sessions, because whenever we take up the texts, we will be referring to these theories again and again. So, for more clarity, you can always go back to the previous lecture where I have discussed the text or introduced them. Thank you very much. I will see you next class.